Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Research Fantasy presents the NBA Fantasy Baller DFS edition. I'm actually putting this out here as early as I possibly can to give you more time to soak in the information when making your lineups. It is Monday, the 6th of March, so happy 3-6 day to all of my Hypnotized Camp Posse fans out there. This is going to be an interesting slate. 12 games. We're coming off of a 5-game slate. If you listened to the podcast episode yesterday, the value plays were just demolished. All expectations. Terrence Ross had a huge game. Jaylen Brown got a start with Avery Bradley and Al Horford out and put up a good outing. It was a little bit disappointing, to be completely honest with you, given the opponent and the possibilities. And then Tyler Ulis in the same game just went absolutely ham. Really, the only person we didn't hit on yesterday would be Nerlens Noel, and it was just an awkwardly structured game. The Mavericks continue to want to play this small ball, and I don't think it's going to work in the long run with Dirk at the 5. It worked yesterday. All respect to him. Noel got in some foul trouble, and that kind of stuff happens. And if you listen to the podcast or the video series, I typically try to put an asterisk next to everything because there are certain elements that you can't predict. And I think that some people could have said, well, Nerlens had foul trouble in Philadelphia, and, he's taking on a tough front court. What happened in the Memphis game? I mean, he didn't deal with that issue, so why would it be any different against Oklahoma City? Nonetheless, still a very, very, very strong night. Biyombo kind of came out of nowhere and gave a huge value boost that really let you stuff your lineups with Russ, Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins, and that's kind of what I want to talk about a bit. I think sometimes way too much emphasis is put on the fact that you need to get all the value plays. What I said is right. You need to get all the right value plays in your lineup to win, but everybody you put in your lineup doesn't have to hit value. And last night is a pretty good example of that taking place, because even if Aaron Gordon gives you better value than Anthony Davis, he didn't come close to getting better fantasy total. So there's like a 20-point difference between those two players. Even though Gordon was the better value play, he gave you better value in terms of point per dollar sense. But if you had Allen Williams or Bismack Biyombo or Tyler Ulis, it made up for the fact that you didn't have Gordon in your lineup on a site maybe like DraftKings, where you don't have to have two power forwards. And last night's a perfect example, because if you could have played Biyombo, I guess you can't play Biyombo, Allen Williams, and Rudy Gobert, but they all absolutely crushed value. So you kind of don't need to. You really have to put a lot of thought into when you're building your lineup. If you have a bunch of value plays, 2 or 3 value plays that you think can get the job done for you, you can feel good building in guys like Steph Curry right now, LeBron James, DeMarcus Cousins, Anthony Davis, because the likelihood of them hitting 4.5 times their salary is pretty good, and it's tough to find somebody in the 7K range who's going to hit for 45 points consistently. It does happen at times, but then you see their price escalate to the point where there's no longer that upside there. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to our favorite plays tonight. Like I said, this is tough. 12 games, there's a lot of options. Really, this is one of those nights where if you make, depending on how the ownership falls, if you make one wrong move, you could be done basically from the start. I'm starting my lineups out tonight with Paul Millsap of the Atlanta Hawks, 14K on FantasyDraft, 7,700 on FanDuel, 7,400 on DraftKings. He's going up against the Golden State Warriors team that just does not look the same defensively at all, and that's very good things. Draymond Green has been highly questionable defensively all year. I continue to see these metrics and this talk about guys like Joel Embiid and Draymond Green being great defensive players, but blocking shots doesn't necessarily equate to being a good fantasy player here or being a good defensive player. Here's what I look at. How good are you at keeping the ball out of the basket? Look at a guy like Rudy Gobert. He blocks a lot of shots, but he also keeps a lot of balls out of the basket. That's a good defender to me. Someone like that. Kawhi Leonard can lock you down to the point where you're not scoring. It took Andrew Wiggins a lot of minutes to put together a very subpar fantasy outing against San Antonio. So I'm not looking at Draymond Green like that. I'm really especially targeting Millsap on DraftKings at that 7,400 mark. Double-double opportunity for him because I think he can outfight Draymond. And with Zaza only on the floor for 20 minutes, I think there's going to be plenty of rebounding opportunities to go around. I think he could end up with it doesn't even have to be a huge double-double, something like 15 and 10 because he's going to come through with 3 to 5 assists. He's probably going to have a few steals. I have him at about 40 to 42 fantasy points tonight, making him an excellent value and a great person to build around tonight. Let's move to the point guard position, and especially on a site like FantasyDraft where I don't have to roster anybody but point guards at the guard position. Kemba Walker at 15-1, 8,200 on FanDuel, 8,200 on DraftKings. He's a guy I'm going to have just a ton of exposure to. He's been very good on his road trip. Now he's coming back home to the cozy confines of his home court. That's where he plays best anyway. He's going to be taking on a Pacers team on the second half of a back-to-back. I've never been impressed by the type of defense that Jeff Teague plays. To me, this spells another 45 to 50 fantasy point game for the Lion King. I have him tentatively scoring about 45 fantasy points, which puts him just over that 5x mark on both FanDuel and DraftKings. It puts him right about at the 3x mark on FantasyDraft, which is where we want him. I think he's an excellent play tonight. He's one of my core three. My absolute top play, and here's the thing, this guy should see huge ownership because of what he's been doing, everything he's been able to put together, and this is his team with Tim Duncan leaving, so I can only be talking about Kawhi Leonard. 17-7 on FantasyDraft, 9,200 FanDuel, 9,600 on DraftKings. He's basically been putting together 50-point fantasy outings left and right. Even if that's all he got, that would still put him in a position where he's pretty well over 5x value on both FanDuel and DraftKings. It puts him right about the 3x mark on FantasyDraft. I think that this is the type of game that you can see him put up an outing in the mid-50s with the pace that Houston plays at, the fact that they can't play defense, and the fact that it's going to come down to him having to score for this team to be able to get things done. I think he makes an excellent play. It was a little bit tough because there are some guys in certain positions that could be strong plays. Giannis, especially at 10,000 on DraftKings, is in a really interesting position where I think he could hit that, but I'm all in on Kawhi Leonard tonight, and I think most of the DFS universe will be as well. Now let's move on to our favorite value plays tonight, and the first play is someone that we don't even exactly know if they're going to have the opportunity. It sounds like things will pan out for this value play to take place, and it's my top value play. It's Bismack Biyombo, minimum price on all three fantasy sites, 6,000 on FantasyDraft, 3,500 FanDuel, 3,000 DraftKings. He went off last night. He wasn't even happy with his play. He did get in some foul issues, but here's what Vukovic said this morning. It's nothing bad, but it depends on how it feels each day. The last few days, it's really flared up on me. Even in the Miami game, I kind of fought through it in the second half, but today and yesterday, it really didn't get any better, so we'll see. Hopefully, we'll get better fast. So, it doesn't sound very promising for Vuk tonight. I think they play a relatively early game, and they're pretty forthcoming with their injury statuses. You don't really see Greg Popovich-like situations taking place with the Magic. And they do, in fact, play at 7 o'clock. So we will definitely know with plenty of time to go. That's excellent. That's great news. So if Vuk is out, there's nothing stopping me against a really soft interior New York Knicks defense. You can tell me about how Kyle O'Quinn and Guillermo, Wiley, Hernan Gomez, and Kristaps Porzingis are formidable, and they might be offensively, and they might block some shots, but Bismack Biyombo is going to get in there and do what he wants to do. Next up, let's go with Thabo Sefolosha, 7,700 on FantasyDraft, 3,700 on FanDuel, 3,900 on DraftKings, and he is the least sexy name each and every time you look at him to put him in your roster in daily fantasy. There's really no two ways about it, but production is production. He's been doing pretty well. There's gonna be this three-way competition with Bazemore, Hardaway, and Thabo Sefolosha in terms of what types of minutes they see on the floor, and it's been Hardaway the last two games because of the fact that he's actually been hitting his shot. And I think he makes a very good tournament play tonight because I do not foresee a situation where Golden State's going to be able to do anything to guard him. And with guys like Howard and Millsap and Dennis Schroeder on the floor, I don't think they're going to be able to allocate defense to him. But even with Hardaway getting minutes into the 30s, Thabo has still put up 32, 31, 36 minutes in his last three with 16.5, 19, and 29.2 FanDuel points around it. I'm not expecting a huge game here necessarily. I'm not expecting him to put up like 45 fantasy points, but I do think in these situations where teams have more than one solid basketball player, you're going to see him on the court for 30-plus minutes because he's going to be needed for his defense, which he does play well. And when you're playing defense, especially against a guy like Steph Curry, who can turn the ball over quite a bit, I think you're looking at about a 20-point night for Thabo Sefolosha, which should allow him to hit value on all of those sites. Let's go back to the Houston-San Antonio game. Let's talk Patty Mills, 7,100 on FantasyDraft, 3,800 on FanDuel, 3,600 on DraftKings. Again, he's a guy that isn't exactly the sexiest name to be heard. In fact, it's not like he's really even setting the world on fire, and he's only a deep tournament play, but 27, 29, 32 minutes in his last three, fast-paced matchup. If Tony Parker didn't have his legs under him this weekend, it's hard to believe, and these were games against like New Orleans and Minnesota, and those teams aren't rocket pace play games. You know, those are league average at best. Houston is not league average. Houston is going to move. They are probably going to need to use Patty Mills. So what you need to know about Patty Mills is here's how his two potential scenarios go. He either goes off for something like 13 points, 5 assists, 2 rebounds, and a steal, and gives you mid-20 fantasy points, which is yay because a couple of those are going to be 3 points on FantasyDraft and DraftKings. You get the bonus. And at his price, 71 FantasyDraft, 38 FanDuel, and DraftKings, that's great because that could be a free point just on 3-pointers. The other option is he goes for like 3 points, a rebound, an assist, and a turnover because LaMarcus Aldridge and Kawhi Leonard take control of the game. I think that he should be able to be safe for the minutes. And I'm just going to kind of put it at your feet and say if you think that he's capable of putting together 20 to 25 fantasy points, by all means. You know, San Antonio, I think, in the last 2 games has been taken to overtime. You can't predict a game going to overtime. But it wouldn't be the worst look. If you don't feel comfortable with that, I'd throw out Terrence Ross there. He's still sitting in value range, especially on FanDuel, just 4,500. I'd said in the podcast yesterday, 4,500 on FanDuel all night on Terrence Jones. He's just going to be a plug and play. That's 22.5 points. Even if he has a down game and only puts up 18 fantasy points, he didn't kill you. He still got, 4.5 times value, so you're still safe. But then when he has 36 fantasy points, he's giving you 9 times value, 8 times value, and you're ahead. All right, that's enough rambling for me today. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tell all your friends, your family, your pets, anybody who might want to hear the sound of my voice dispensing what I hope is at least quality NBA DFS advice. Head over to researchfantasy.com, sign up for our NBA mailing list. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Research and Win, and join in again tomorrow.